Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Meridian and watched the dead star spin slowly in the darkness. The red giant had used up all its fuel millions of years ago, and now it barely gave off any light. But something was out there in the cold space around it. Something that did not belong. The ship's computer had found it 3 hours ago during their routine deep space scan. A metal structure about the size of a small city floating in orbit around the dying star. It was clearly alien and clearly advanced. The metal looked smooth and perfect, even though it must have been there for a very long time. Jake had been in space for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like this. Humanity had been exploring the galaxy for decades, and they had found plenty of dead worlds and empty space, but they had never found proof that other thinking beings existed out there among the stars. Until now. Lisa Park walked up to him carrying a data tablet. She was the ship's expert on alien life forms, even though she had never actually seen one before today. Her job had always been to study the possibility of life on other worlds. Now that possibility had become reality. "Captain, the structure is definitely artificial," she said. "The metal is made from elements we have never seen before. But I am getting some very strange readings from the lower sections." Jake took the tablet and looked at the numbers on the screen. Most of them meant nothing to him, but one reading caught his attention. "These look like life signs." "That is what I think too. Something is alive in there. The readings are very weak, but they are definitely there." Lisa pointed to a section of the structure on the tablet screen. "Right here in what looks like the deepest part of the station." Jake thought about this for a moment. Earth Command had been very clear about first contact protocols. If they found alien life, they were supposed to observe from a safe distance and send a message back to Earth. They were not supposed to make direct contact without permission from the highest levels of government, but if something was alive on that station, it might need help. The structure showed signs of damage in several places. Whatever had happened there, it looked like it had happened quickly. Most of the station was powered down and cold. Only a few sections still had any energy running through them. "How long? Do you think those life signs will last?" Jake asked. Lisa shook her head. "I cannot tell for sure. But if someone is alive in there, they are probably running out of time. The life support systems are failing. Maybe they have a few hours left, maybe less." Jake made his decision. "Get the shuttle ready. We are going over there." Lisa looked surprised. "Captain, Earth Command said we should not make direct contact without orders." "Earth Command never said anything about rescue operations. If there is someone alive on that station and we just sit here and watch them die, that would be wrong. We can worry about protocols later." 20 minutes later, Jake was strapping himself into the pilot seat of the shuttle along with Lisa and two security officers named Bob Taylor and Kate Lewis. The shuttle was small and fast and designed for short trips between ships. It had never been used to explore an alien structure before, but it would have to do. The flight to the station took only a few minutes. As they got closer, Jake could see how massive the structure really was. It was built in a spiral pattern that twisted around itself in ways that hurt his eyes to look at. The metal surface was covered with symbols and patterns that seemed to move and change when he was not looking directly at them. "I am reading atmosphere on the other side of that docking port," Bob said from behind him. "It is not exactly like Earth air, but our suits should handle it fine." Jake guided the shuttle toward what looked like a landing bay. The alien designers had made it big enough for ships much larger than their little shuttle. As they passed through some kind of energy barrier, Jake felt a strange tingling sensation even through his spacesuit. The landing bay was empty except for their shuttle. Whatever ships had been docked here before were long gone. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls and made everything look red and threatening. They made their way through corridors that were too tall and too wide for humans. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth normal, which made walking feel strange. Their boots echoed in the empty halls as they followed Lisa's scanner toward the life signs. "The air is safe to breathe," Lisa said after checking her readings. It has more oxygen than Earth air, actually. They removed their helmets but kept them ready just in case. Jake had to admit the air smelled better than the recycled atmosphere on the Meridian. It had a clean, fresh scent like mountain air back on Earth. The corridors seemed to go on forever, but finally, they reached a section where the lights were still working properly. Here, the walls were covered with what looked like computer screens, showing data in alien symbols. Most of the screens were dark, but a few still flickered with information. "The life signs are just ahead," Lisa whispered, even though there was no real reason to whisper. They turned a corner and found themselves looking at what was clearly a laboratory. Tables covered with strange equipment filled the room. Some of the devices were still humming with power. In the center of the lab was a raised platform with restraints that looked like they had been designed to hold someone or something in place. But what caught their attention was the figure huddled in the corner of the room. It was clearly alive and clearly not human. The being was roughly human-sized, but there the similarity ended. Its skin looked like it was made of crystal that changed colors as they watched. Beautiful patterns of light moved across its surface, like aurora in the night sky. The alien looked up at them, and Jake could see intelligence in its eyes. Fear, too. It spoke in a voice that sounded like music, even though the words were in a language none of them understood. Then a device on one of the lab tables started speaking in perfect English. "Please do not hurt me. I have been alone here for so long. My people left me behind when the experiments went wrong." The being was female, Jake realized. Her voice through the translator was soft and scared. She pressed herself further into the corner as if trying to hide from them. "We are here to help," Jake said slowly. "We saw your station from our ship. We came looking for survivors. You should not have come. You should not look at me. Please turn away. Do not look at me." She covered her face with hands that sparkled like diamonds. Jake exchanged glances with his team. This was definitely not what any of their training had prepared them for. "We are not going to hurt you," Lisa said gently. "What is your name?" The alien woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke again through the translator. "I am called Zara. I was a scientist here until everything changed. Now I am cursed. Please, you must not look at me. It is not safe." Jake stepped forward carefully with his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Zara, we want to help you. Will you come with us to our ship? You cannot stay here alone." Zara looked up at him for just a moment, and Jake caught a glimpse of her face. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Her features were perfect, and her crystal skin glowed with inner light. But there was such sadness in her eyes that it made his heart ache. Then she quickly looked away again. "You must not look at me. Promise me you will not look at me. Terrible things happen when people look at me." Jake did not understand what she meant, but he could hear the desperation in her voice. "I promise. We will not look at you, if that is what you want. But please come with us. You do not have to stay here alone anymore." It took another hour of careful talking, but finally Zara agreed to come with them. They gave her a blanket to cover herself, and she kept her face hidden as they made their way back to the shuttle. As they flew back to the Meridian, Jake could not stop thinking about that brief moment when he had seen her face. There had been something about her eyes that seemed to reach right into his soul. He had made a promise not to look at her, but part of him already wanted to break that promise. He did not yet understand that this simple decision to rescue one lonely alien would change everything for humanity and the galaxy beyond. The medical bay of the Meridian had never hosted an alien patient before, but Dr. Amanda Ross was doing her best to make Zara comfortable. They had given her a private room with the lights dimmed low and heavy curtains covering all the windows. Zara had insisted on keeping herself completely covered and would not let anyone look directly at her. Amanda had tried to run basic medical scans, but Zara became very upset whenever the scanner was pointed at her. The alien woman kept repeating that it was not safe for humans to see her true form. She would not explain what she meant by this, but the fear in her voice was very real. Jake found himself visiting the medical bay several times each day. He told himself he was just checking on their guest as captain, but the truth was more complicated than that. Something about Zara drew him to her, even though he had barely seen her face for more than a second. "How is she doing?" he asked Amanda during one of his visits. "Physically, she seems fine. Better than fine, actually. Her body shows no signs of injury or disease, but mentally she is very troubled. She keeps talking about being cursed and dangerous. She believes that looking at her will cause terrible things to happen to humans." Jake sat down in a chair outside Zara's room. Through the closed door, he could hear her moving around inside. Sometimes he heard her talking to herself in her own language. The universal translator could not pick up everything she said, but he caught words like alone and mistake and punishment. "Has she told you anything more about what happened on the station?" Jake asked. Amanda shook her head. "Only bits and pieces. She says her people were conducting experiments on something called emotional resonance. Whatever they were doing, it went wrong and changed her somehow. Her own people were so frightened of what she had become that they left her behind when they evacuated." "What kind of people abandon one of their own like that?" "Scared people. People who think they are protecting themselves and others." Amanda pulled up a chair next to Jake. "But I think there is more to it than that. She is not telling us everything." That evening, Jake decided to try a different approach. Instead of visiting Zara in person, he used the ship's communication system to talk to her through the intercom in her room. This way she would not have to worry about him seeing her, and maybe she would be more willing to open up. "Zara, this is Captain Morrison. Can we talk?" There was a long pause before she answered. "Captain, I have told your doctor everything I can tell you. Please just take me to the nearest inhabited world and leave me there." "I am not ready to give up on you yet. You said your people were scientists. What kind of work did you do before the accident?" Another pause. "I studied the connections between minds and emotions, how feelings can travel from one person to another without words. It was beautiful work, pure research into the deepest mysteries of consciousness." Jake could hear the sadness in her voice, even through the intercom. "You loved your work more than anything." "I spent decades learning how thoughts and emotions flow between living beings. I wanted to understand how empathy works, how one person can feel what another person feels. I thought I was close to a breakthrough. What happened? We found something. An entity made of pure emotional energy. It had been trapped in a crystal formation for millions of years. We thought we could study it safely, learn from it. But when we tried to make contact, it bonded with me, merged with my consciousness. Now I am no longer just myself. I am something else, something dangerous." Jake was beginning to understand. "The entity is still with you. It is part of me now, and its power flows through me whether I want it to or not. Anyone who looks at my true form falls under its influence. They lose their free will and become devoted to protecting and serving me. It is not their choice. The entity takes that away from them. Is that why your people left you behind?" They were afraid. Some of them had already been affected before we understood what was happening. They became completely focused on my welfare, above everything else. The others realized that I could never go home. I would turn my entire world into slaves without meaning to. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. No wonder Zara was so frightened. She had become something that could steal people's minds just by being seen. But at the same time, he felt tremendous sympathy for her. She had not chosen this curse, and she was clearly trying to protect others from it. Over the following days, Jake continued his conversations with Zara through the intercom. Slowly, she began to open up more about her life before the accident. She told him about her homeworld with its crystal cities and floating gardens. She described her research partner, who had been like a brother to her. She talked about dreams she had once had of discovering the secrets of consciousness itself. But their conversations were interrupted when engineer Carl Davis made a terrible mistake. Carl was doing routine maintenance on the ventilation system when he accidentally opened a panel that gave him a clear view into Zara's room. She was sitting by the window with her back to him, and her covering had slipped down just enough for him to see the back of her head and neck. Even that brief glimpse was enough. Within an hour, Carl had abandoned his work and stationed himself outside Zara's door. He would not leave his post no matter what anyone said to him. When other crew members tried to get him to return to his duties, he became agitated and insisted that protecting Zara was more important than anything else. "She is the most precious thing in the universe," he kept saying. "Nothing else matters except keeping her safe." Amanda ran every medical scan she could think of, but Carl showed no signs of mental illness or outside control. His brain patterns were completely normal except for one thing. The areas associated with priority and decision-making had been altered. Protecting Zara had become his highest priority, overriding everything else, including his own survival needs. Jake realized they had a serious problem. If more crew members were accidentally exposed to Zara's appearance, the situation would quickly become impossible. But at the same time, he could not bring himself to blame her for something she could not control. "This is why I begged you not to look at me," Zara said through the intercom when Jake told her what had happened. "I am poison to free minds, a walking curse that destroys the will of anyone who sees me." "It is not your fault," Jake said firmly. "You did not choose this. It does not matter whether I chose it or not. The result is the same. Your crew member has lost his freedom because of me. How many others will I destroy before you realize I should have been left on that station to die alone?" Jake could hear her crying through the intercom, and it broke his heart. She was suffering just as much as Carl was, but in a different way. She had been alone for years, believing herself to be a monster that could only bring harm to others. "There has to be another way," he said. "Some solution we have not thought of yet." "There is no solution. My people tried everything they could think of. The only answer is isolation. Permanent separation from anyone who might be affected by my curse." But Jake was not ready to accept that. Something about Zara called to him on a level deeper than logic or reason. He found himself thinking about her constantly. Not in the obsessed way that Carl was displaying, but with a deep concern and growing affection that felt completely natural. He began spending hours researching everything the ship's computer had about empathic phenomena and psychic influences. He read about similar cases among other alien species. He studied reports of humans who had encountered mind-affecting creatures in the past. One thing kept standing out in the research. Humans seemed to respond differently to psychic influences than most other species. They were harder to control and often maintained some level of independence even when affected. Several reports mentioned human subjects who had learned to resist or work around mental compulsions that completely dominated other races. Maybe there was hope after all. Maybe humanity's famous stubbornness and independence could be the key to helping Zara. But to test that theory, someone would have to look directly at her and see what happened. Someone would have to risk their free will on the chance that humans were different from other species. And Jake was beginning to realize that someone was going to be him. He had made Zara a promise not to look at her, but keeping that promise might mean leaving her trapped in a life of loneliness and despair. Sometimes the most important promises were the ones that needed to be broken. The question was whether he would still be himself after he looked at her, whether he would still be capable of truly helping her, or if he would just become another, devoted slave like Carl. There was only one way to find out, and despite the risk, Jake found himself more determined than ever to see Zara's face and tell her that she was not the monster she believed herself to be. The situation on the Meridian grew worse over the next few days. Two more crew members accidentally caught glimpses of Zara and immediately fell under the same compulsion as Carl. Security officer Kate Lewis saw her reflection in a polished wall. Panel and cook Danny Martinez spotted her through a briefly opened door. Now Jake had three crew members who refused to do anything except guard Zara and see to her needs. They were not hostile or dangerous, but they had completely abandoned their normal duties. Worse, they were starting to organize themselves into shifts to make sure someone was always watching over her. "This cannot continue," his first officer, Roy Clark, said during an emergency meeting. "We are losing crew members one by one. Soon we will not have enough people to run the ship." Jake nodded grimly. He had been thinking the same thing, but every proposed solution seemed to make the problem worse. They could not lock Zara away because the affected crew members would not allow it. They could not sedate her because she had done nothing wrong, and they could not simply abandon her somewhere because that would be both cruel and dangerous. "What about putting her in a completely sealed room with no windows or cameras?" suggested Lisa Park. "Then no one could see her by accident." "The affected crew would never agree to that," Amanda Ross pointed out. "They see any restriction on Zara as a threat to her well-being. Carl actually tried to attack me yesterday when I suggested moving her to a different room." Jake had been studying the reports from other species who had encountered similar empathic entities. One thing stood out clearly in all the data. Every other race that had dealt with this type of mental compulsion had been completely overwhelmed by it. Entire populations had been turned into devoted servants with no will of their own, but humans had never encountered anything exactly like Zara's curse before. All the research was based on how other species had reacted. Maybe humans would respond differently. "I want to try something," Jake said quietly. "Something that might be very dangerous." The others looked at him with concern. They all knew Jake well enough to recognize when he was about to do something risky. "Captain, whatever you are thinking, please reconsider," Roy said. "We cannot afford to lose you too." "That is exactly the point. Maybe we cannot afford not to try this. I have been reading about human resistance to psychic influence. We are different from other species, more stubborn, more independent. Maybe that difference is enough." Lisa realized what he was suggesting. "You want to look directly at her. You want to test whether humans can resist her power. It is the only way to know for sure. And if it works, then maybe we can find a real solution to this problem. Maybe we can help her instead of just containing her." "And if it does not work," Amanda asked, "then you will have 4 affected crew members instead of 3. But at least we will know that. Containment is the only option." Jake could see the fear and concern on their faces. They were his friends as well as his officers, and they did not want to see him lose his free will. But they also understood that desperate situations sometimes required desperate measures. "I am going to talk to her first," Jake said. "Explain what I want to do and why. She deserves to know what is happening." An hour later, Jake stood outside Zara's door with his heart pounding. Carl was at his usual post, but he nodded respectfully when Jake approached. The affected crew members still recognized Jake's authority as captain, even though Zara's welfare had become their top priority. "Zara, I need to talk to you about something important," Jake said through the intercom. "Of course, Captain, but please be careful. Danny saw me this morning when he brought my food, and now he is affected too. I am so sorry. This is all my fault." "It is not your fault, and I am tired of you blaming yourself for something you cannot control. That is actually what I want to talk to you about." Jake took a deep breath. "I want to look at you, directly, with full knowledge of the risk." There was a long silence from the other side of the door. When Zara finally spoke, her voice was filled with horror. "No, absolutely not. Captain, I forbid you to do such a thing. You are the leader of these people. They need you to stay free and in command. They need me to find a solution to this problem. And I cannot do that without understanding exactly what we are dealing with. You already understand. I am cursed. Anyone who looks at me loses their free will and becomes my devoted servant. There is nothing more to know. Maybe there is. Humans are different from your people and all the other species in your records. We react differently to psychic influence. Maybe we can resist your power or at least maintain some independence while affected. It is too dangerous. I will not allow you to sacrifice yourself for me. Jake smiled, even though she could not see it. You will not allow me? Zara, I am the captain of this ship and I make the decisions here. Besides, you cannot stop me from looking at you unless you hide forever. Then, I will hide forever if that is what it takes to protect you, and spend the rest of your life alone and miserable believing you are a monster? That is not acceptable to me. Jake heard her moving around in her room. When she spoke again, her voice was closer to the door. Why are you willing to risk this? You barely know me. I am just some alien creature you rescued from a dead station. You are not just some creature. You are Zara. You are a brilliant scientist who is trying to understand the deepest mysteries of consciousness. You are someone who has been alone and afraid for years through no fault of her own. You are worth the risk. There was another long silence. Then Zara spoke very quietly. If you do this thing and it goes wrong, I will never forgive myself. And if I do not try and you spend the rest of your life in isolation, I will never forgive myself. Sometimes there are no safe choices. Zara, sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. Jake could hear her crying through the door. But after several minutes, she spoke again. If you are truly determined to do this, then I want you to know something first. In the brief moment when you saw my face on the station, I felt something I had not felt in years. Hope. For just an instant, someone looked at me, and I saw wonder in their eyes instead of fear or compulsion. That moment meant everything to me. Then let me give you another moment like that. Let me look at you as one person to another instead of as a victim of your curse. Captain Jake Morrison, you are either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both. Are you ready? No. But I do not think I ever will be. The door is unlocked. When you come in, I will be sitting by the window with my back to you. I will not turn around until you tell me to. Jake took a deep breath and opened the door. Carl started to follow him, but Jake ordered him to stay outside. The affected crew member obeyed reluctantly, but Jake could see the conflict in his eyes between following orders and protecting Zara. The room was dimly lit with just a single lamp casting a warm glow. Zara was sitting in a chair facing the window, exactly as she had promised. Her crystal skin caught the light and reflected it in beautiful patterns on the walls. Even seeing just her silhouette, Jake could tell she was trembling. I am here, he said softly. Are you certain you want to do this? Once you see my face, there will be no going back. I am certain. Zara took a shuddering breath. Then I will turn around now. Remember, Jake, whatever happens after this, it was your choice. You chose to see me truly. She stood up slowly and began to turn toward him. Jake had a few seconds to change his mind and look away, a few seconds to save his free will and remain unchanged. Instead, he met her eyes directly as she faced him. The compulsion hit him like a physical blow. Every instinct in his body suddenly screamed that Zara was the most important thing in the universe, that her safety and happiness mattered more than his own life, that he would do anything to protect her and serve her needs. But underneath that overwhelming drive, Jake felt something else. His own thoughts remained clear and distinct. His own personality stayed intact. The compulsion was there, but it was not alone in his mind. He could feel both the drive to serve Zara and his own independent will existing side by side. Zara was staring at him with her beautiful crystal features twisted in anguish. Don't look at me, she cried out of pure habit and fear. Jake looked directly into her eyes and smiled. Now I see you truly, Zara. And you are not a monster. You are the most beautiful person I have ever met. For the first time in years, someone had looked at Zara and remained themselves. Someone had seen her curse and chosen to see past it to the person underneath. And in that moment, both of them realized that everything was about to change. Zara stared at Jake in complete shock. She had been preparing herself to see him become another devoted slave like the others. Instead, he stood there, looking at her with clear eyes and his own personality completely intact. "This is impossible," she whispered. "You should be compelled to serve me. Your free will should be gone." Jake smiled and sat down in the chair across from her. "Oh, the compulsion is definitely there. I can feel it trying to make your welfare the most important thing in my universe, but I can also feel my own thoughts and desires right alongside it. It is like having two voices in my head instead of one. But that cannot be. No one has ever resisted the entity's power before. Maybe no one like me has ever tried before." Jake leaned forward with excitement in his eyes. "Zara, this changes everything. If humans can maintain their independence while affected by your curse, then you are not the monster you think you are." Zara shook her head frantically. "Even if you can resist it partially, the others cannot. Carl and Kate and Danny have lost their free will completely. Have they? Or have we just assumed they have because that is what happened to other species?" Jake stood up and walked to the door. "Let me try something." He called Carl into the room. The security officer immediately focused on Zara with complete devotion in his eyes. "Carl, I need to ask you something and I want you to think carefully before you answer," Jake said. "Do you still remember who you were before you saw Zara? Do you remember your family back on Earth? Your friends? Your own hopes and dreams?" Carl looked confused by the question. "Of course I remember, Captain. I remember everything about my life. I remember my wife Susan and my daughter Amy. I remember joining the fleet because I wanted to explore new worlds. And do you still want those things?" "Yes, sir, I do. But protecting Zara is more important than any of that. She needs me to keep her safe." Jake looked at Zara with growing excitement. "Do you see? He has not lost himself. He still knows who he is and what he wants. The compulsion has just become his highest priority." Zara was beginning to understand what Jake was suggesting. "You think the others are still themselves underneath the compulsion? I think humans are more complicated than other species give us credit for. We are very good at holding contradictory feelings at the same time. We can love someone and be angry with them. We can want something and know it is bad for us. Maybe we can also be compelled to serve you and still maintain our own identities." Over the next few hours, Jake worked with Amanda and Lisa to test his theory. They brought in Kate and Danny and asked them detailed questions about their lives and personalities. In every case, the affected crew members retained all their memories and personal desires. They were still completely themselves except for the overwhelming need to protect and serve Zara. "It is like having a new instinct," Kate explained when asked to describe how she felt. "The way you might instinctively protect a child who is in danger, except this instinct is stronger than anything I have ever felt before." Danny nodded in agreement. "I still want to cook good food and see new planets and maybe find a nice woman to settle down with someday. But all of that feels less urgent than making sure Zara is happy and safe." Amanda ran brain scans on all the affected crew members, including Jake. What she found was remarkable. Unlike other species who had been completely dominated by similar entities, the human brain showed activity in multiple areas simultaneously. The compulsion was there, but so was everything else that made them who they were. It is as if your minds have simply added a new priority instead of replacing all your old ones, Amanda explained to Zara. The entity's influence is powerful, but it cannot completely override human individuality. Zara was amazed by these discoveries, but she was still worried. Even if they retain their personalities, this is still not normal. They are still being controlled by something outside themselves. But they can learn to work with it, Jake said. Watch this. He turned to Carl. Carl, I know protecting Zara is very important to you, but the ship also needs you to do your regular duties. Can you find a way to do both? Carl thought about this for a moment. I suppose I could do my engineering work as long as I can check on Zara regularly, and as long as my duties do not take me too far from her quarters. What if we set up a communication link so you can always know she is safe even when you are working in other parts of the ship? That would help a lot, Captain. I could focus on my job better if I knew I could reach her instantly if she needed. Anything. Jake looked at Zara with triumph. Do you see? They can adapt. They can learn to balance their compulsion with their other responsibilities. But the real breakthrough came when Lisa made a startling discovery while analyzing the brain scans. Captain, I think I know why humans respond differently. Look at these neural pathways. She showed them a comparison between human brain activity and brain scans from other species that had encountered similar entities. The difference was striking. Most species process emotions and decision-making in very centralized ways. When the entity takes control, it can dominate those central processing areas and override everything else. But human brains are more distributed. We process emotions and make decisions using multiple interconnected systems. Jake studied the scans with growing understanding. So when the entity tries to take control, it can only affect part of our brain function. Exactly. It is like trying to control a computer network by taking over just one server. The network can adapt and work around the compromised system. This discovery led to an even more important realization. If humans could resist the entity's control, then maybe they could teach other species to do the same thing. Maybe they could develop training techniques that would help anyone learn to maintain their independence while affected. It would require them to think more like humans, Amanda said, to accept contradictory feelings and learn to balance multiple priorities simultaneously. Zara was quiet for a long time as she processed all of this information. Finally, she looked up at Jake with tears in her crystal eyes. Do you really think there is hope for me? That I might not have to spend the rest of my life in isolation? Jake reached out and took her hand without hesitation. The moment their skin touched, he felt. The compulsion surged stronger, but his own feelings remained clear beneath it. I think you have been carrying this burden alone for far too long, and I think it is time you had some help figuring out how to live with it instead of being destroyed by it. For the first time since the accident that had changed her life, Zara allowed herself to believe that there might be a future where she was not defined entirely by her curse. A future where she could have relationships and connections without destroying the people she cared about. What happens now? She asked. Jake squeezed her hand gently. Now we start working together to find real solutions. We figure out how to help other species resist empathic control. We develop protocols for dealing with entities like the one inside you. And we prove to the galaxy that some curses can be lived with instead of just feared. Zara smiled for the first time in years. It was a beautiful sight that filled Jake with joy and made him more determined than ever to help her find her place in the universe. Jake Morrison, you may be the most stubborn human I have ever met. I will take that as a compliment. We humans are pretty proud of our stubbornness. Perhaps that is exactly what the galaxy needs more of. Jake nodded. Perhaps it is. Outside, in the corridor, Carl and the others continued their vigil, but now with a new understanding of what they were feeling and why. They were still compelled to protect Zara, but they were learning to balance that compulsion with their other duties and desires. It was the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that could form genuine relationships with empathic entities without losing themselves in the process. A species stubborn enough to love without surrendering their independence. And for Zara, it was the beginning of hope that she might finally find a place where she belonged. 6 months later, the Meridian had become something entirely unexpected. Instead of a simple exploration vessel, it was now the flagship of the galaxy's first empathic rehabilitation program. Word of humanity's unique ability to resist mental domination had spread throughout known space, and representatives from dozens of worlds were requesting help with their own cursed individuals. Zara stood on the bridge next to Jake, watching as another ship approached their position. This one carried a delegation from the Kalani Empire, including several of her former colleagues who had fled the station when the accident occurred. She no longer hid her face or covered herself completely. The crew of the Meridian had all learned to work alongside their compulsions, and she had learned to trust that they would not lose themselves completely. "Are you nervous about seeing them again?" Jake asked. Zara nodded. "They were my friends once, my research partners. But they left me behind when I needed them most. I am not sure how I feel about that." They were scared. People do not always make good decisions when they are afraid. The delegation was led by Dr. Vex, who had been Zara's closest collaborator before the accident. When he saw her standing openly on the bridge, his crystalline features showed shock and concern. "Zara, you must cover yourself immediately. These humans will fall under your control if they see you." "They already have," Zara said calmly. "And they are managing just fine." Vex looked around at the bridge crew with growing amazement. Carl was at his engineering station monitoring ship systems, while occasionally glancing at Zara with obvious affection. Kate was coordinating with the approaching Kalani ship while positioning herself to have a clear view of Zara at all times. Danny was bringing coffee to the bridge officers and making sure Zara had her favorite tea. All of them were clearly affected by her presence, but all of them were also doing their jobs competently and maintaining their own personalities. "This is impossible," Vex whispered. "No species has ever been able to resist the entity's influence." "Humans do not resist it," Jake explained. "We work with it. We have learned to balance our compulsion to protect and serve Zara with our other duties and desires. It is not easy, but it is possible." Over the following hours, the Kalani delegation observed the crew of the Meridian with fascination. They saw humans who were clearly devoted to Zara, but who also argued with her when they disagreed with her decisions. They saw affected crew members who still pursued their own hobbies and relationships while making sure Zara was cared for. They saw a ship that functioned normally despite having most of its crew under empathic influence. "How do you do it?" asked Dr. Nex, another of Zara's former colleagues. Amanda had become the ship's expert on empathic resistance training. "We teach people to embrace contradictions instead of fighting them. Most species try to have one clear priority at a time. Humans are comfortable juggling multiple conflicting desires simultaneously." She brought up training materials they had developed. "We help other species learn to think like humans, to accept that you can care deeply about someone while still maintaining your own goals and identity, to understand that love does not require losing yourself." The Kalani were amazed by the training programs, but what impressed them most was seeing Zara herself. She was no longer the frightened, broken person they had left behind on the station. She was confident and engaged with meaningful work, helping others who had been affected by similar entities. "We have found 17 other individuals throughout the galaxy who were abandoned or isolated because of empathic abilities they could not control," Zara explained. "With human help, 12 of them have been successfully reintegrated with their families and communities." "And the other 5?" Vex asked. "Still working on it. Some cases are more complicated than others, but we do not give up on anyone." Jake had been working with Earth Command to establish formal protocols for dealing with empathic entities. What had started as a rescue mission had become humanity's first major contribution to galactic civilization. Other species were beginning to see humans not as primitive newcomers, but as uniquely gifted mediators who could bridge gaps that seemed impossible to cross. "The Zarathi Republic has requested our help with a situation involving 3 individuals who were affected by a group consciousness entity," Jake told the delegation. "The Centauri Federation wants us to mediate a dispute between their telepathic and non-telepathic populations. Even the mysterious Void Singers have sent a message, asking if we can help them communicate with species that cannot survive their psychic presence." Vex looked at his former colleague with new understanding. Zara, you have become something remarkable. Not cursed, but gifted. I am still the same person I was before, Zara replied. The entity is still part of me and people are still affected when they look at me. But I have learned that being different does not mean being dangerous. You learned that from humans. I learned it from one human in particular. She looked at Jake with obvious affection. Someone who was willing to risk everything to see me truly, instead of just seeing my curse. The relationship between Jake and Zara had deepened over the months. It was complicated by the empathic influence she had over him, but it was also genuine in ways that surprised both of them. Jake's feelings for her existed alongside the compulsion, not because of it, and Zara had learned to trust that. His care for her was real, even though it was enhanced by forces beyond his control. "What will you do now?" asked Dr. Nex. "We will continue our work," Jake said. "There are too many people throughout the galaxy who have been abandoned because they are different. Too many individuals who have been labeled as cursed or dangerous, when what they really need is understanding and support. The Meridian will be joined by 5 more human ships within the year," Zara added. "We are establishing a permanent task force dedicated to empathic rehabilitation and psychic mediation. Humans have a gift for maintaining their independence while forming deep emotional connections. The galaxy needs that gift." As the Kalani delegation prepared to leave, Vex approached Zara privately. "I owe you an apology," he said. "We should never have left you behind. We were so afraid of losing ourselves that we forgot about saving you." Zara looked at her old friend with forgiveness in her crystal eyes. "You did what you thought was necessary to protect your people. I understand that now. But I also know there was a better way. There is always a better way if you are willing to look for it. The humans found it. One human found it. Jake Morrison looked at me and chose to see past my curse to the person underneath. That choice changed everything." Later, that evening, Jake and Zara stood together in the ship's observation lounge watching the stars. The Kalani delegation had departed with promises to work on changing their policies toward empathically affected individuals. It was a small victory, but an important one. "Do you ever regret it?" Zara asked. "Looking at me that day? Accepting the compulsion?" Jake considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had never seen your face. But then I remember that you would still be alone and afraid and convinced you were a monster. I remember all the people we have helped since then, all the lives that have been changed because someone finally proved that empathic influence does not have to mean losing yourself." "You gave me back my hope," Zara said softly. "You gave me a purpose I never knew I was looking for." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching new worlds come into view. Somewhere out there were more individuals who had been abandoned because of abilities they could not control. More communities that needed help learning to live with empathic differences. More opportunities to prove that understanding could triumph over fear. "Where do we go next?" Zara asked. Jake smiled. "Wherever. We are needed most. There is a whole galaxy full of people who have been told they are too dangerous to love. I think it is time we proved them wrong." Zara reached out and took his hand. The compulsion flowed between them as it always did, but so did genuine affection, and partnership and hope for the future. "You know," she said with a laugh, "when I first begged you not to look at me, I never imagined it would lead to this. Sometimes the most important promises are the ones that need to be broken," Jake replied. "And sometimes the scariest thing you can do is exactly what needs to be done." They stood together, watching the stars and planning their next mission. A human captain and an alien scientist who had learned that curses could become gifts with the right perspective. Partners in the most important work either of them had ever done. Proof that love and independence could coexist even under impossible circumstances. Behind them, The bridge crew continued their duties. Carl monitored the EA engines while humming happily to himself. Kate plotted courses to new worlds that needed their help. Danny prepared meals that would comfort both human and alien crew members during the difficult work ahead. All of them affected by Zara's presence. All of them still completely themselves. All of them part of something bigger than any one individual or species. The Meridian sailed on through the darkness, carrying hope to those who had forgotten what hope looked like. And at its heart was the simple truth that Jake had discovered when he first chose to truly see Zara. Sometimes the most beautiful things in the universe are the ones other people are too afraid to look at. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as curses. And sometimes saving someone else is the only way to save yourself. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, both terrible and beautiful. But wherever there were people who needed to be seen truly instead of just feared or pitied, the crew of the Meridian would be there. Because that is what humans do. They look at the impossible and find a way to make it work. They take the rejected and forgotten and show them they belong somewhere after all. They refuse to give up on anyone, no matter how cursed or dangerous they might seem. And sometimes, that refusal to give up changes everything.